Hi, readers. How are you today? Um, I am hoping to celebrate the stories that we have written all together, our personal narratives, by sharing with you one of my favorite stories about writing. And I don't know how many of you have read this before, but this one is called Rocket Writes a Story. As you might have guessed, the main character in this story is Rocket. I don't know if you've ever read any other books. There's another one about Rocket learns to read, which is a really cute one too. But in this one, Rocket writes a story, and I thought it would be a nice way for us to celebrate your personal narratives. It is by Tad Hills, and I think he also is the illustrator. Rocket loved books. He loved to read them to himself or sit quietly by his teacher, the little yellow bird, as she read them aloud. Rocket even liked the way books smelled. When he opened a new book, it smelled like a place he'd never been to, like a friend he'd never met. The little yellow bird agreed. Books are inspiring. They make me sing. Rocket loved words, too. After snack time, his teacher would say, Rocket, why don't you use that nose of yours and sniff out some new words? And off he'd go. He'd fetch some nice ones like buttercup and bug and feather and nest. I'm looking for words, Rocket would announce to anyone who would listen. Rocket always brought his words back to the classroom and wrote them down. The little yellow bird would help him spell the tricky ones, and then they'd hang them on their word tree. Sometimes the bird added her own words to the collection. This one is small, but I promise it will come in handy, she'd say. Magnificent, chirped the little yellow bird once their tree was covered. Now, what shall we do with all these splendid words? Rocket thought all afternoon. Then he had an idea. I think this is the word that she says is small but handy. It's the word up. Rocket left school that day with a very waggy tail. I'm going to write a story, he declared to Fred and Emma. My story will be an adventure about the great wide world, he told a butterfly. I will use many words, he explained to Mr. Barker. Hello up there, he called as he passed a tree where he had found the word nest. I'm going to write a story. Just going along telling everybody about it, isn't he? Pretty excited. The next day, Rocket returned to his classroom. It was time to begin. He looked down at the blank page, and the blank page looked up at him. But no story would come. At snack time, Rocket gave up. I don't know what to write, he told his teacher. Has that ever happened to you, writers? Where you were like, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to write, and then the words don't come out? I know it's definitely happened to me before. Don't worry, said the little yellow bird. One of the hardest parts of writing is coming up with a good story, but it's one of the most fun, too. Perhaps you want to write about something you've seen. A bug? Asked Rocket. Yes, sang his teacher. Stories need good characters. Or what about something that happened to you? Or something that you really enjoy? My favorite stick? Suggested Rocket. Of course, said the bird. Or you could write about something that inspires you. Inspires me? Asked Rocket. Yes, something that excites you, the little yellow bird sang. These are all good ideas. I wonder what he's going to write about. Take a minute right now and think. Do you think he's going to write a story of adventure or something he'd seen or something that happened to him or that he enjoyed or something that inspires him? Do you have a prediction about what he might write about? Rocket took a walk and looked for inspiration. He thought about friends he knew and places he'd been. He stuck his nose up high in the air and sniffed the gentle breeze. And there it was, the delightful smell of pine needles and feathers. Inspiration! For the rest of the morning, he thought about the feathers and pine needles and feathers. That afternoon, he decided to write. In the evening, Rocket followed the beautiful smell until he found himself at the tree with the nest. "Hello again," he called into the branches. "Is anyone home?" He heard rustling from above, but no one answered. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I must tell you that you smell very nice, very inspiring. May I ask who you are?" Still nothing. "Perhaps I'll come back at a more convenient time," he said, and trotted off. That night, as Rocket watched the stars, he thought about feathers and a nest and a pine tree. He thought about his story and his collection of words. On the way to school the next day, Rocket was surprised by what he saw. A brand new word. And it's already written down. It says, he tried to sound out the word. "Owl," came a quiet voice from the branches. "It says owl. That's me." "Thank you, Owl," Rocket called. "I'm always looking for words, and this one's a beauty." Rocket ran all the way to his classroom. O-W-L, owl. "Now there's a word you don't hear every day," chirped the little yellow bird. "Only 3 letters, but what a word!" "It was a present," explained Rocket, and he added the new word to his story. "I'm writing a story about you," Rocket announced proudly to the owl the next morning. The owl poked her head out of her nest, and for the first time, Rocket saw her friendly face. Her big round eyes blinked below feathery tufts. "About me?" she asked softly. "Would you like to come down and hear it?" asked Rocket. "Thank you, but I'll listen from my nest," the owl answered. So Rocket cleared his throat and began to read. "Once there was an owl. She smelled like feathers and pine needles. She lived in a tree." The owl's eyes widened. "Is there more?" "There will be," said Rocket. I love how Rocket's working on his story and adding more to it. So like you guys. Each day, Rocket worked on his story. He wrote words down and crossed words out. When things were going well, he wagged his tail. When he didn't know what to write, he growled. Sometimes he drew pictures for his story, or took a walk in the meadow for inspiration. Makes me think that all writers must have times when they don't feel like they're doing great or they get a little bit frustrated. The little yellow bird encouraged him. "Remember, stories take time," she'd say. She wanted to know more about the owl and asked Rocket questions. Why do you think the owl wouldn't come down? What color is her beak? What does she do every day? Rocket wanted to know more about the owl, too. Oh no, forgot this page was ripped. He visited her tree often and read her his story, which changed every day. The owl was captivated. Captivated is when you can't stop listening, when you're just sort of so focused that you can't help it. You're just drawn in. And when Rocket stopped, she would always say, "Then what happened?" Do you guys notice what I'm noticing about the owl? She's coming closer and closer and closer to Rocket. At last came the day when Rocket knew he was finished. "What a fine story," chirped the little yellow bird after she'd read it. Rocket ran to the owl's pine tree. "It's done," he called. "Come listen." And so down came the owl till she was right beside Rocket. Then Rocket began to read. He read about an owl with friendly eyes and a beak the color of buttercup. She lived high in a nest in a tree on the edge of a meadow and smelled like pine needles and feathers. She liked to nap in the daytime and listen to stories. Branch by branch, the owl came down from her nest, Rocket read. She was shy, but she was brave, too. Suddenly, Rocket stopped. He wrote something on his paper, then began to read again. One day, the owl came all the way to the ground and became my friend. The owl blinked. "Can there be one last sentence?" she asked. "Can you say, 'And the owl liked the story very much'?" "What a perfect ending," said Rocket. And it was. So, readers, I thought that would be a nice story to celebrate the hard work you have done and the stories you have written. I cannot wait to read them. And if you were feeling inspired by Rocket writing his own story, I would totally encourage you to go start a new story today. It could be a story about you, or perhaps you want to try to write a story where the dog is the main character. And you can pretend to sort of write a story about Rocket, maybe create some other adventure that he goes on or some other friend he makes or problem he solves. All right, I'll see you all soon.